Good morning. This is Mary Janine coming to you live from the Sewing Studio's world headquarters in Maitland, Florida. We are so glad you're here, and I have a lot of brand new content for you. I got some great projects that maybe you've seen years and years ago, but hopefully something new for everybody. I am here today to inspire you to go home. You are home. Use up that stash. Maybe come in for a couple new tools that I'm going to tell you about. I've got some great tips. This is tips, tools, and techniques. So I always forget when I'm doing this to say, oh, here's a tip. But hopefully you guys are smart enough. You know it's a tip. You know it's a tool. It's a great technique. So that's why we're here. I talk about quilting. I talk about sewing, a little bit of serging and embroidery sometimes. Today I've got some Christmas gift ideas that are quick and easy that you're going to love. And let's see. And I have one announcement. I wanted to talk about the Shop Hop. I believe I mentioned this last month, but just in case, the Fa La La Fat Quarter Shop Hop. We can do an overhead, right, Gabriella? There we go. And this is a passport. So if you've never done a shop hop before, a passport allows you to get all the stamps from all the 9 shops in the area. If you get everything stamped, you put in for a grand prize, and there are 9 grand prizes of $75 gift cards, and then there's 9 regular second prizes, $50 prizes. And you buy this for $5 before the shop hop, $6 after the shop hop. But the best news of all is every store gives you a free fat quarter, and a lot of shops have a drink or little snack to sustain you as you get back in your car and continue on to the next shop hop. So a lot of people do this as a fun thing with their friends, get in the car and hit some new shops that you haven't seen in a while. See the kind of samples, everybody. I love visiting shop hops in my shops in my travels because I like to see all the samples that are hanging and all the beautiful things going on. So anyway, shop hop. Oh, I didn't tell you the dates. November 19th through December 4th. And I'd love to see a good morning and tell me where you're watching from so we can see how far and wide we're going. Call your friends, tell them to join us. And if you guys somebody's not able to join now, of course, you know that it always stays up on Facebook so you can watch later. If something I'm showing you didn't quite catch or you didn't remember and you want to actually make that project, of course, you can always rewind and stream it again from Facebook, which is a really nice thing. Eventually, we're hoping to get back to some kind of face-to-face thing, maybe something hybrid, but until then, this is a pretty wonderful thing because I get to talk to people all over the world, and we get to rewind me, so I don't have to do it twice or even say anything twice because you can rewind me. So let me tell you about some of the classes coming up. So my Apron class filled like immediately. So we said, well, let's offer another one. And then that did not fill. So I'm going to tell you about it in case you want to learn some basic sewing skills. So this Apron class, you have an option of learning one of 2 aprons. So I love this one. It's called the crisscross apron. It's actually reversible. And it has 4 pockets, so 2 on the front and 2 on the reverse side. So if one side gets dirty and the guests are coming over, why am I having trouble with this? It's very 3-dimensional. If you're having guests come over, you can quick switch over to the clean side. And yeah, this is the one, well, not this particular one, but I've made this 5 or 6 times, and this is the pattern I choose to use at home when I'm cooking because it covers everything that I want to keep clean. So that's choice number 1, and the choice number 2 apron is a little jazzier, and this one has a tie around the waist, it has a hook on the neck, and then it has some really pretty buttons along, and it's called the 6-point triangle. And we have patterns for both, and they're listed on my favorites page, which I haven't mentioned. If you're just joining us, I have a handout for some of the projects that I'll be talking about today, so be sure to scroll up and to the top of the description of the Facebook event and click on that, print out your handout, and Gabriella will also be posting that in the comments every once in a while for the handout. So go ahead and print out your handout now so you can follow along or put it up on another screen. Anyway, back to the apron. So cute little buttons. And again, it's a pretty basic sewing class. And I scheduled it for 4 hours as opposed to the regular 3, just to make sure that we get the project done. I don't want to send you home with a half-done project. It was a cute little pocket. So it's a 4-hour class. The first class is full, but there's some openings in the second class. And that's, you can sign up online or you can call the store and sign up. Oh, I should tell you when that second class is. The apron class is December 8th. It's a Wednesday. Another class that I'll be teaching again is called June Bloom, and it's a wool wall hanging. So we talk about how to create the front. I also do a little demo on how to create the gallery facing on the back so you don't have any binding. You could bind this if you wanted to, you absolutely could, but sometimes it's kind of fun to do a gallery facing, so it's a little bit more like a piece of art as opposed to a quilt. And it's all fusing. Until you get to the quilting itself, the free motion quilting, it's all fusible. And I quilted this in a free motion way, but you could also just do straight lines in a diagonal format with your walking foot. So if you're not comfortable free motion quilting, you can absolutely use a walking foot to do that. So there's some beautiful colors on there, and I have a surprise to use these colors next month. I can't wait to show you. Anyway, this class is November 29th and December 6th. Those are 2 Mondays. So you come and we just work in class, and I'm going to play some nice music maybe, and we just relax and fuse and relax and fuse. And you can finish it in class, or you can go home and work on it in between classes. But anyway, it's a good class. I've got a machine quilting. I can't believe I've got a Saturday class, and usually they fill up right away. And because of my schedule, I only do 2, maybe 3 Saturday machine quilting classes a year. And there's one coming up, and it's not full, so you guys sign up. It's November 6th. I think there's either 1 or 2 more openings. And then I have another one on November 22nd. It's a Monday, so probably right before Thanksgiving. So machine quilting. So I teach you everything to do with putting those 3 layers together. Machine quilting does not mean making a quilt with a machine. It means going through those 3 layers to make sure that your batting is secure and the quilt will lay flat. And we talk about threads and basting and needles and batting, troubleshooting, how to mark a quilt, if at all. To be honest, I don't mark most quilts, but we'll talk about it. And just about any question that might come to your mind. I have many students who take this class 2, maybe 3 times, because even though I say the same things each time, you're in a different place in your quilting journey, and you're going to learn something different each time. So that's machine quilting. November 6th is a Saturday, and November 22nd is a Monday. Finally, my binding class filled up right away. It was a Saturday, so I'm offering a second one on December 1st, which is a Wednesday. So if you would like to take a binding class, I teach not only how to bind a quilt with mitered corners, but how to put a sleeve on. We talk about labels and how important they are. So basically finishing. And I know a lot of people say I hate binding, but I love it because it cleans up the edges, it finishes everything beautifully, and it means that I'm done making the quilt. So that's my binding class. And I have a coordinating video that goes with it. So if you take the class, you'll have access to the video so you can see me do certain steps over and over as many times as you want, which I think is pretty cool. All right, so are there any questions? Or Gabrielle, I haven't been watching the comments. Germany, welcome Primrose from Germany, Williamsburg, Virginia. And thank you for Kim telling my mission. Kim took my machine quilting class a long time ago, and I'll never forget because she is an art teacher, and she sat down and quilted a picture of a KitchenAid mixer. I don't forget that, Kim. And I was like, oh, I think you should be teaching this class. So Kim is a great quilter. And welcome from Germany and all the other really cool places. All right, we're going to get started with, for no further ado, I want to show you, talk about this quilt first. It looks like it's bigger than it is, but actually I've got more quilts back there to talk to you about. This is a pattern that I have been talking about for a while. I actually wrote it many years ago. I just recently, this week, updated the whole entire pattern. I rewrote just about every single line. I call this Happy Stars, and so I made this quilt with brand new fabric, and it's Dr. Seuss fabric, as you might be able to see, which is adorable. I especially like, I'm just going to do this here, I especially like the backing, which is Dr. Seuss balloons. Isn't that amazing? And so I think what really makes this fabric work is that the designs are small. So if you chose a fabric that had big flowers or something, that probably wouldn't work with this particular pattern. So there's a tip. If you're thinking about what kind of fabric do I want for a pattern, if your pieces are very small, you're probably going to want smaller designs on the fabric. If your designs are very big, like we'll talk about in a moment for another quilt, then you can afford to get bigger flowers, like the K-facet flowers or something like that. And so, yeah, you have to. It's one of the things you have to think about when you're looking for fabric. And I think people tell me more than anything else, "Ooh, choosing the fabric, that is the most stressful thing. I don't even know where to begin." And we talk about in my quilting basics class, which I forgot to mention, but there's no opening, so you can catch me next quarter. Quilting basics, I cover everything. And one of the things I talk about is how to choose fabric for a quilt. So if you don't mind, I'll just talk about that for a minute. How to choose fabric for a quilt. There's tons of different ways. Number one, you could make the quilt exactly like the designer made it, right? And if we have a quilt hanging in the store, chances are pretty good we've got that exact fabric somewhere. Sometimes it sells out completely and we've got it on order and it's coming soon. But most of the time, the fabric is around there somewhere. So yeah, you could just do that. I love the quilt. I love the colors. I just want to do that. That's perfectly fine. The second possibility is you could choose a layer cake or a strip, a jelly roll, or the whole set of fabrics that are already cut together, a pre-cut. Thank you, a pre-cut. And Gabriella, I forgot one thing. On the first bridal table is a basket of all the things I'm talking about. There's some blue 10-inch squares, and Gabriella's going to run really fast. Sorry, we're just going to stay right here and keep talking. Anyway, so that's the second way. You can just use the fabrics all from one designer. You know they worked out really well, and you can put them into a quilt and they're going to be great, which is what I did on this blue quilt that you'll be seeing soon. Or the third method is to choose a focal print, one print, let's say. Let's talk about this green here. You can't get up close here, but it's got some green, it's got some yellow and some white and some red. So maybe I can go looking for a fabric that's got that red in it, fabric that's got that yellow, fabric that's got the white, maybe some large, maybe not a solid, but something that reads as a solid, maybe a stripe, maybe a polka dot. So it's just a nice mix of different size designs, plus the colors that are in that quilt. So you're picking out a focal print that has multiple colors. You could, thank you so much, you could even use the selvage where it tells you where all the colors are, and you could take those colors on the selvage and you could go to the store and say, okay, I want this red, this yellow, this whatever. So those are three ways to pick out fabric for a quilt. It's not the only ways. There's tons of other ways to choose fabrics for a quilt, but if you're a beginner and you're just totally stressed about picking out fabric, there's three ideas for you. This is, by the way, a pre-cut, which I'll be talking about in a minute. So 10-inch squares, so that's one of the ways you can do it. You pre-cut or 10-inch squares, 5-inch squares, 2.5-inch strips, fat quarters. This quilt was actually made with fat quarters. So I picked out 6 different fat quarters to make 6 blocks. If you wanted to make Happy Stars and you wanted to make it you wanted a much bigger quilt, you could pick out 8 or 10 or however many fat quarters. That's how many blocks you would get. So with 6 fat quarters, I get 6 blocks. And I've got a little demo for that, and I'll talk about in just a moment. And then you would also need the sashing fabric, and then finally border fabric. Now let's talk about sashing. I've got sashing here, but these stars also have sashing. And there's 2 different ways to sash this quilt. So let me pull another idea out of my stash here. I've got 2 other Happy Star quilts. This quilt is actually on the cover of my pattern. And it's going to look really different for two reasons. Put it up here. It looks different for two reasons. Number one, each of my stars is made out of 2 colors instead of all 6 colors. So we talk about how to do that in the pattern. And as you notice, I've got a green and pink here, and then I've got the mirror or the reverse image of that down here. So I cut my fabrics up 2 at a time instead of 6 at a time. But the other difference here, you'll notice, is you'll notice, you don't have to zoom in, but the sashing here is thinner here and thicker here. And the reason is I used the same width of fabric, but I pieced it in here. So I end up with a 1/2 inch of sashing, blue sashing fabric. But up on this quilt here, I used what I call flat piping. So it is flappy, and just as an aside, it gets stuck into the seam, and I'll talk about how to do that in a minute. But just as an aside, if you take your quilts to a long arm quilter, you're probably not going to want to use this technique, because she or he is going to have to go around that. They don't want to nail it down probably, or if they do, their machine might get stuck and they would say bad words, and you wouldn't be their favorite person. So probably stay away from this particular technique if you use a long armor. But let's talk about how we do this. Oh, and let me show you one more quilt while I'm here. Since it's Halloween, and that fabric and this fabric are no longer around. I made these a long time ago, but as you can see, it is a Halloween quilt. And again, I pieced in the sashing, but I used all 6 colors on each star. So, or mostly. I think I got lost track. The other thing I love about this one is I love free motion quilting these pumpkins, and if you come to my class, I'll teach you how to free motion these pumpkins. And so if I can make a fall quilt, that means I can free motion pumpkins, because I love that. I love that design, and it's just really much out of my head, but I'll teach you how to do that in the class. So, and a cute back. Again, we don't have this fabric, so please don't ask for it, but I wanted you to see how cute that was. We can still enjoy the fabric, can't we? All right, so let's do a little demo here. And Gabriella, we're going to go get the above camera now. First of all, if you're going to use the technique, let me just show you a finished little star here. If you're going to use the technique with the I can't talk, flat piping. Did I have a question? Yeah, the flat piping, then I'm going to highly recommend this product. It's on my favorites page. You may not even know that such a thing exists, but it's fusible thread, which means you put it in your sewing machine and you sew with it, but then you can iron that thing down and it will stick, which is really nice for binding. I've never used it for binding, but I know a lot of people who love it for binding. And so you would put it in your bobbin, sew your binding down. When you flip it over to the other side, you can press your binding down before you sew it down. So that's what some people use this for. But this is mostly what I use it for when I want to make flat piping. And by the way, this is a technique you can use in lots of quilts. You can use it as an inner border for a quilt, and I do that quite often. Sometimes I'm making a commission quilt for somebody and she wants several inner borders, but she doesn't want to pay me to put them in, so I will use this technique, and it's super easy and fast to do. So what I did is I wound a bobbin at home with my fusible thread, and then you could use any color and I really should use a different color now that I think about this, because that's black thread. You can't see the black thread on the front, but you can see the fusible thread on the back, and you can see that I'm sewing as close to the raw edges as I possibly can. And by the way, I forgot to say, this is 1 inch wide, folded in half, right side out, and then pressed. And then I put that in the bobbin. So now I've got a piece of flat piping that can go anywhere in my quilt. And I choose to put it in the outlines of a star. So I got a quick little demo for you. I would love for you to buy this pattern. I wrote it, and we have it for sale on my favorites page. But let's start with, let's say, and you know what, I use squares, but if you want to take your fat quarter and leave it as a rectangle and make a star out of that, of course you're perfectly welcome to. Your block doesn't have to finish as a square, mine do. So I decided where I'm going to make my star. I talk about that in the pattern. So there's my first cut, and I'm going to take my pile here and I'm going to sew this piece to this piece. But before I do, I'm going to insert this piece of fusible flat piping. So I'm going to lay this down and take my iron. I'm not going to do that right now because I didn't want a hot iron around me because I'm already hot enough. But I'm going to press that, go to the ironing board, press it. And now the trick here is figuring out, where does this go? Does it go here? No. Does it go here? So you just kind of settle it in. You want to kind of line everything up. You know what? I'm going to move this. Might be easier to see. My point here is that we want to use as much fabric as we can. We don't want to waste a lot. If we did this, we're going to waste that, and we're going to waste that. So we kind of trying to center it as much as possible. When you're all done, there is going to be some waste that you're going to trim off, but you try to make it as little as possible. So once this is pressed down, it's really going to hold. This is a very biased edge. So that's really holding that biased edge together. And now I can, so what I do, we had 2 pins, didn't we have? No. Oh, here's one. Ha! I need another pin, but I'm going to show you what I do here. Is I pin mark that, and I pin mark it here where it's going to match up, right? And then I match up those 2 pins, and I sew. And probably the best thing to do, actually, is to flip this over. And here's another tip for you. You always want to try to sew with your bias edge at the bottom. B for bottom, bias on the bottom, because your feed dogs do a really good job of moving that fabric along, but your top foot sometimes does not. So if you put bias on the bottom, everything will feed at the right rate. You don't have to worry about this bias because it has been glued. I really should have taken this away. You're probably confused. I don't have to worry about this bias because I've glued it to the straight piece of flat piping. So it's pretty stable. I just have to worry about that bottom one. So hopefully that made sense. So there we go. I'm going to move that aside through the magic of TV. We've got one that's already done, and there it is. Let me get another one that's a little easier to see. So you see I've got the flat piping. So I'm ready to go. I've got one set. I'm going to make another cut, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to insert that bias. And again, if you're not doing this method, you're doing the flat piecing method, you would just piece that in. You wouldn't use the fusible. So here it is. There's my second cut. And then I would just keep on going until I finally finished making stars. So this particular technique, I'm doing 2 at a time. Again, you could do all 6 at a time as well. So if you do 6 at a time, you have a different way to shuffle the fabrics, and I talk about that in the pattern as well. So that's Happy Stars. I am happy to revisit this block because I love it. I've made this many times. I've taught it many times, and it is just, it's a happy place. So if there's any questions, I'd love to hear them. If you're just logged in, let us know where you're watching from, because we love to see that. It gives us moral support that we're reaching all kinds of great people. All right, so Gabrielle, I can't really see because of the light. Are there any questions? No. Okay. All right, we are going to take this quilt down. Oh, extra thread. And you will probably see this quilt hanging, hopefully by the Dr. Seuss fabric. I'm not sure where, but hopefully you'll see that hanging because that's a really fun quilt. Let me step out of the way here for a minute. This quilt is called Piece of Cake, and I call it Piece of Cake Blues. I used a layer cake to make this quilt, and it actually uses about 30 of the squares, so I was able to have a few extra to make mistakes. And yes, it's a very simple quilt, but I managed to make a few mistakes, which I will probably talk about. But I love this pattern so much that I've decided it's my next beginner quilt. Probably the next O. Henry class in December might be my last one, unless somebody really wants O. Henry in January. I think I'm going to transition to a new beginner quilt, which will be this one, called Piece of Cake Designs. So we're going to come back. Thank you. So I used this particular layer cake. It's on my favorites page, but I wanted to tell you, you know, I rarely read what it has in the back. It's like I just tear it apart and start using fabric. But for some reason, I think I was just sitting waiting for something. So I started looking at it, and I noticed it says how to pre-wash pre-cut batiks. Soak in Synthropol warm water, hang strip to dry, lay squares flat. Who knew? I have never pre-washed my pre-cuts before, and I'm really glad I did, because that water was very blue. So let me tell you what I did. I took just a bucket or a bin, filled it with warm water. I followed the directions on the Synthropol, which is a really handy thing. I talked about this pretty sure it was last month. If not, it was 2 months ago. But Synthropol, and we have another fixative that works in a slightly different way for fabrics. But this mentions Synthropol, so that's what I used. So I just put in, I think, a teaspoon for a bucket of water, a gallon, and then swished these around, and I think the instructions said let it sit for so many minutes, so I did. And then I rinsed it in clean, cool water, and then laid it out on a towel till they were almost dry, and then I took them to my iron and I ironed them dry. So that means there was all the extra dye was out, and if they're going to shrink at all, they shrunk because I ironed them nice and hot and flat and dry. So yes, it's an extra step, and no, you don't have to do this with every pre-cut you get. I don't want to scare you off pre-cuts, but there's a lot of dark batiks. In fact, I didn't pre-wash the light ones, or maybe I did, but I did them at the very end, and of course nothing came out of them. I just wanted to treat everything the same. If I'm going to pre-wash some fabric, it's probably best to pre-wash it all. But I did treat the darker ones, and a lot of dye came out. I also pre-treated these two batiks here in the inner border and outer border, and I'm glad I did, because a lot came out. This is actually a extra wide, double wide fabric that we have, and definitely dye came out of that, and a little bit came out of this one as well. So always a good thing to test your fabrics. We talked about how to test your fabrics with a little bit of hot water. Check to see if your fabric is bleeding dye out into your hot water, and if it is, it's a good reason to pre-wash your fabrics. If there is no bleeding, then don't worry about it. Just continue on and enjoy the process. So hopefully, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. So quick demo on that. Hang on. Oh, I forgot to show you. I do have the O. Henry. If you're wondering why I just mentioned O. Henry, I do have one more class that's coming up December 7th and 14th. It's a Tuesday. I know it's close to Christmas. That's the best we could do. This is an old O. Henry. I have it right side up? Nope, wrong side up. This is an old O. Henry quilt. We don't have the fabric for this anymore, but this is the one I was able to get at the last minute at my house. But it's a very simple quilt. You can either use a panel or just running yardage. This is actually running yardage. It looks like it came from a panel, but it's kind of like an ombre, but it's the same design over and over, and it just came out. And then you just pick out 3 other fabrics for the rectangles and then 1 fabric for the sashing. So that's the O. Henry, and again, I probably won't be teaching again after December, so if you wanted to learn that quilt, December would be a good time. All right, back to my regularly scheduled program here. So the piece of cake pattern, you know, sometimes they develop these patterns and they put it out, and you're like, yeah, those colors don't really do anything for me, but I'm really glad I got the pattern, because I love the result in a color that works for me, and maybe these colors work for you, and that's what you should do. The pattern is from Thimble Blossoms, so that's why I really didn't think, I mean, it's not there, the colors that they usually use for Thimble Blossoms, if you guys know those lovely ladies. Anyway, so that's the pattern for this. Of course, you can buy the pattern without having to take the class. What are the star patterns called? It's called Happy Stars, and it's on my favorites page, which Gabriella will post a link to in the comments. Thank you for asking. All right, and then Gabriella, when you're done with all of that, let's do an overhead shot. So how do we make this piece of cake design? I'm going to put the pattern here so you can see it if it's not too shiny. I think that works. So I have a dark and a light. So the first thing I did when I opened up my layer cake and I washed everything, I sorted it from dark to light, which there's a little bit of sorting going on, but I sorted it again. And then if I had a really, really dark, let's go up on the wall for a minute here, Gabriella. If I had a really dark fabric, I'm going to pair it with a medium. If I had a really light fabric, I'm going to pair it with a medium. But some of these mediums, what do you pair it with? So some of these are not as high contrast as others, but I think that makes it even more interesting. If every single one was high contrast, then maybe that wouldn't be so interesting. So let's go back to the overhead here. So I have a dark and a light. I'm going to lay them on top of each other. And by the way, sometimes pre-cuts, especially once you pre-wash them, they're no longer going to be 10 by 10, but that's okay with this pattern because we're going to trim everything down to size anyway. I'm going to take my ruler. I've talked about this before, and people think that this handle is good. It's what I use to hold the ruler down. That's actually not how I use it. If you've taken a class with me in the last 2 years, I talk about how to use a rotary cutter, and for me it's very important that part of my hand is off the ruler, because if you're just doing this, I'm exaggerating, but as you're cutting, this could still happen. But if you have part of your hand down on the fabric or the mat, then that ruler can't go anywhere. So I think what I'm supposed to do here is cut a 3-inch piece. Yeah. So this is the way I hold it. I put my hand around this and I put my hand down off the ruler a little bit. And yes, this makes it a little difficult. The 3-inch line is difficult to see, but the rest of the lines are pretty easy. So I'm going to cut, and then I'm going to cut at the 5-inch mark. That's my 5-inch mark. And there we are. There's the whole block right there. If I flip that over, I can sew those pieces together, and then I can sew those pieces together, and I just built 2 blocks right there. So as you can see, a very simple block, but if you're a beginner quilter and you don't understand about scant 1/4 inch, you don't understand about how to rotary cut, because we talk a lot about how to rotary cut. If you don't understand about how to trim a block down, those are all good reasons to take the class, but we'd love for you to just buy the pattern and maybe a layer cake as well. This is a great pattern for beginners. Maybe you're teaching somebody how to quilt. There's just so many reasons why this particular quilt is great for beginners. So if there's any questions, put them up there for me. If you just log on, continue to let us know where you're logging in from, because we love to see that. And so then I just want to show you. So one of the mistakes I made is I accidentally cut the first few blocks too small. Yeah, so this was like 8 3/4, and that's too small. And I can't remember why I did that. I was just in a funk, and I wasn't doing it. Fortunately, I only cut 4 of them wrong. But when you do sew these together, you're going to have these long, skinny blocks, not super skinny, but so they need to be trimmed down because you took seam allowances. You took 1 inch away from this direction, but you didn't take any inches away from this direction. So you're going to have to cut these down to be a square, because Gabrielle, let's go back to the wall. As you can see, they get set up in a checkerboard style, so they have to be squares so they fit perfectly together. The pattern tells you how to cut the inner border, how to cut the outer border. I use the binding from the inner border fabric, and I think I mentioned Oh, I did use a different fabric. I was thinking I used the backing fabric for the border, but no, I didn't. The border is the one that's extra wide that I got used, and I was actually able to use it for a whole nother quilt because this wasn't quite wide enough for everything I needed. So, but it was the color I needed. And I don't know if you guys have ever bought extra wide fabric, but it is a really good value. If you think about it, let's say a yard of fabric is $12, okay? A extra wide, instead of being 42 inches wide, it's going to be 108 inches wide. So that's like 2.5 times the amount of fabric for about, it's usually $18 or $20 a yard. So it's less than twice the price, but you get more than twice the fabric. So oftentimes I'll just kind of walk by the extra wide yardage to see if there's some like a basic fabric that I might need in a quilt, and I'll buy a 1/4 yard, a 1/2 yard, and it's 108 wide, and you can get a lot of yardage out of just extra wide fabric. So good, it's a good value if you're looking to save a little money on fabric, and who isn't? So if there's not any questions from Melbourne, I'm guessing that's Melbourne, Florida, not Melbourne, Australia. You have to get up for that. Washington State, hello. I think Jolene, I remember that from last time because I love the Dolly Parton song, Jolene. I'm sure you get that every day. Okay, so if there's no questions about the piece of cake design, we will move on. What was I going to do? I'm eventually going to get to the handout, really. Okay, we are going to get to the handout. So if you have not had a chance to print out the handout, Gabrielle is going to put it in the comments again. Hello from Arizona, Sandy. Sandy, didn't you used to live here? I feel like you did. I recognize that name. Anyway, if you print out the handouts or at least have them up on another screen, then you can follow along. I'm about to tell you how to make, excuse me, these circle zip, and we're going to do an overhead so you can get a little bit of a close-up here. These are some old ones that I've made. We don't have this fabric, but we do have this fabric, and I forgot to go fetch it and put it up on my favorites page. We can do that later. But this is, these are called circle zip, and actually the original one from the pattern designer is probably about this size, but I also like the larger ones for storing different things. So you can put a little bit of makeup, you can carry them, you can put some doggy-doo bags on the leash and hang them that way. I'm sure you guys could each come up with a different thing to store in these little circle zip bags. But they also have a little tab with a metal ring, and we have some of those on my favorites page. It could really just be anything. In fact, where is it? I have one that I've used. I'll show you this. Well, is it this one? Yeah, okay. I'll have to pull it out. So I don't know if you're a knitter, maybe you know what this is. This little white plastic. I never figured out what they are, but I have a whole bunch of them. Sometimes I find them at garage sales, or somebody will give me a box of old sewing stuff and that'll be in there. I'm like, and I use them. Sometimes I sew them on the back of my quilts. If I have just a small wall hanging I want to hang in my house, I will sew just a little tacking stitch, 2 of them on the back of a quilt, and then I can hang them on a wall with a needle hammered in an old sewing machine needle, or a command strip or something like that. But anyway, this matched the color, there it is. This matched the color of my zipper pull better than the metal one, so that's why I chose that instead. But this one is farther down than the demo, so we'll put that away for a minute. Okay, so here's what we're making. We've got a little zipper, and to be honest, I had some of this zipper tape at home, so I came in and looked for fabric that went with it. So that might be a good recommendation. Find a zipper tape you like. So what the heck is zipper tape? Instead of buying a single zipper every time you need a zipper, let's say I needed a bunch of purple zippers, this is a good way to go. We get 3 yards of zipper tape, and then how many of these things? 8 slides. So I'm not going to show you at this moment how to do it. There's tons of YouTube videos on how to get the zipper tape. It's not hard. I did it a bunch of times yesterday. It's not hard. So you get 8 slides, 3 yards. So if you're making a bag, let's say the bag calls for like 3 or 4 zippers, this might be a good way to go because all the zippers would match and you just be buying 1 instead of 4. And I was hoping the price was on here. It's not, but I'm sure my wonderful Gabriella support person is going to look it up for me and post some of those on my favorites page. So scroll down. How much are the zipper tapes? And this is Pam, D-A-M-O-U-R, Pam Demour. Sure somebody can help me with that. So yeah, and we have more than just her tape. We've got some other tapes up on the wall as well. All right, so back to the zipper, or back to the circle zip pouch. So a great Christmas gift. So there is one of my zippers that I've already put the tab on. I'm playing with fire here because I didn't do a little sew here or here. So if I wasn't careful, this thing would come off. So I'm going to be super careful and not slide my zipper head off. One of the things I wanted to show you, because it could be a little hard to understand on my pictures, so I wanted to do it. So this might be look at the number, look at the timeline and know what number. So if you need to go back, you can go right back to this spot. So how to create this side, this piece here, and actually here it is right here. How do I create one side? So lining right side up, and then zipper right side up. All right. And then the outside wrong side up, and then finally, whoops, not that one, finally my batting. Now you're supposed to sew through all that, like how the heck, you know, and how do you even pin it when you've got this thick zipper tape? So what I love are these products from Steam-A-Seam, and this is on my favorites page. I'm going to recommend the 1/4 inch tape, but if we run out of it, and actually at home I ran out of the 1/4 inch, so I just took the 1/2 inch tape and just roll my rotary cutter down the 1/2 inch tape, and I cut it in half, and that worked just fine. So then we start it, and this would be even better if I had glasses on and if I had fingernails. There it is. Okay, I'm going to just take off the blue part because I don't know if that's any good. And this is actually has double paper on it. So we're going to take one of the papers off, and I'm going to basically use this tape to baste down. Why isn't this sticky? Oh, I'm using the wrong end. I'm going to use this tape to baste down all my pieces. So I'm going to hit that with an iron just for a second. Once it's cool, you can peel that off and then put down the zipper, put some more tape down. Once it's cool, iron it. Once it's cool, peel off the tape. And I'm doing multiple of these at a time, by the way, so there's really no sitting around and waiting. And then I put that wrong side down, one more piece of tape, and then finally my batting. Okay, so now I have a sandwich that's really going to stick together nicely. I take it to my sewing machine, sew down my 1/4 inch, open it up, top stitch down so it looks beautiful. So it's going to look like this. All right, you can't see it, it's a black top stitch line, and you can see it a little bit better there. Everything is beautiful, everything is down. Now I got to do the other side, and this is where to me it was even trickier, so I want to help you with that. So again, with the oh, now I'm working with the smaller one, that's why I'm confused. Okay, so again, lining is right side up. I've already got some tape on here that I could peel off because I pressed it at home. Again, with the zipper right side up. This is right side up, and the zipper is right side up. I'm going to lay that down. And what's nice about the Steam-A-Seam product is it's repositionable. So I think I've got it, but let me just flip it over. And yeah, it's a little crooked. I want this to be centered on that. So I can just lift this up because I haven't pressed it down yet, and I could try again. Yeah, I probably should have just done it the first time that way, but that's okay. All right, so there we are. And then I'm going to take another piece of tape, tape that down. This is my outside, and I've already got tape here. So I can stick this down, and again, I'm paying attention that I got everything centered. If it's not centered, you're going to be trimming more pieces off your circle zip, and it won't be as big as you'd hoped it would be. And then finally, my last piece is my batting. So again, once I hit it with an iron, everything's stuck together beautifully. I can take it to my machine, sew it down, open it up, top stitch it down, and now my top piece is complete, right? Hope you're with me so far. What is the largest size zipper pouch, Cam? It's as big as you want it to be, but thank you for asking. What's probably you asking what size mine is. Let's see. It's 6 inches because I happen to have a set of circle rulers, which I didn't realize I needed to order until a couple days ago. So we don't have any circle rulers, but we have some other products on my favorites page that allow you to draw circles and cut circles. You could also find a bowl in your cabinet that is the size you want it to be and just rotary cut around the bowl. At the top of an oatmeal container. You can use there's lots of different circles in your pantry that maybe you didn't even know. But it finishes at, looks like 6.5 inches. Yeah, so that's the biggest one. The smallest one finishes at about 3.5 inches. So there we go, there's that. All right, couple more little demos here. Where was I? Oh, this one. No, here it is. Okay, I've got Wonder Clips on my favorites page because Wonder Clips are very handy here. If you're not familiar with them, they're handy little buggers and they're very strong. And I like them for places where if I tried to put a pin through this, it would shift. There's so many thicknesses and it's so small that a pin would just shift things around and I wouldn't get a nice round piece. So I take my Wonder Clips and I'm just going to kind of spread them around. Oh, you know what? One more thing before I do that. This probably wasn't as a beautiful round as I wanted it to be. Maybe I don't know if you can see here, but my stitching came out, right? And that's not good enough because I'll tell you what's going to happen, because it happened to me several times, like, oh, that'll be okay. But then when I sew it to the next piece and I open it up, there was a hole there. So now I make sure that I stitch all the way around and I trim it down, because when I sew it together, I want both, and there did more of the same. See, I need to re-sew this. I need to sew it so all the fabrics are caught up, because I don't want any holes in the edge of my circle thing. So that's an important step that I didn't do here, probably because I wanted to tell you about it. But I'm going to sew all the way around and all the way around this one. Put them right sides together. I forgot to tell you about the tab. The tab it's on the pattern. It's a little 2-inch square that you fold and sew. So it's nice to have a tab to not only hold it when you zip, but also just be able to attach this to something else. So if you want to attach it to your keys or your belt or something, you have a little zip there. And of course, if you've ever made a bag, you know you have to leave this a little bit open before you sew everything closed. When you sew all the way around, you need a way to get this right side out, right? So you want to make sure you leave that open a little bit. But I can't stress enough how important it is to sew all the way around, and then you inspect your work, make sure everything got caught in, inspect my work. Okay, it's ready. I can sew all the way around, and then again inspect your work on both sides and make sure you sewed inside of all the previous stitching. And again, if you make multiple at a time and you're using the same thread and you're using a walking foot, you can really assembly line these pretty well for Christmas gifts. But you're going to go all the way around one more time, make sure you caught everything. And here's where I like to trim as close to the stitching line as possible, so then I can flip it right side out. You can't really see on this one very well. Maybe you could see it better on this one. Then I top stitched all the way around, and what that does is kind of like a binding. It kind of catches all those raw edges on the inside. Let me talk about zippers for a minute. I didn't mention that this zipper by the yard, and a lot of zippers we carry, are plastic teeth, which are really nice when you're sewing across the ends. If you've ever sewn on a metal zipper across the ends, it's kind of scary because you could break a needle. So what I end up doing is using my hand wheel to just kind of work my way. Well, I didn't have to do it here because I went beyond it. but there was one here that oh, here it is. This is metal, and I had metal all the way over here and metal all the way over here. So I literally turned my hand wheel. We always turn it to ourselves to step over that, because I'm certainly not going to hit the gas and hit the metal and break a needle and possibly ruin the timing on my machine. So you hand walk your machine over here and you hand walk your machine over here. That's not as necessary here. You can still do it if you want, or you could just sew really slowly, but it's much more friendly, this plastic zipper teeth, than the metal. I just happen to have this huge pile of zippers that I'm always trying to use, so that's how that ended up. So let's see, what size is your seam? So when I'm sewing, if you're talking about the outside seam, all I'm doing is trying to sew, and I'll get to the other seam in a minute, but I'm just sewing as big as I can get, but still catching all the fabric, so whatever size that is. But then when I go to sew this outside seam, I'd say it's a generous 1/4 inch. And I'm looking at it, it's not perfect, and this looks more like an oval than a circle, but that's okay. But yeah, you're just trying to catch all your seams. So if you trim it nice and tight, then you can have a fairly small seam. In that way you have still have a lot of room in here for whatever you need room for. So hopefully that, do you clip your seams before you turn it inside out? I don't, Sherry, and I think that because the curve is an outside curve, if it was an inside curve, I would definitely clip my seams to reduce bulk. But the reason I don't is there's not much left to cut, because I'm trimming my piece. Once I do that final sew and I make sure that I caught all my fabrics, and if I trim it with my scissors, there's really nothing to clip, really. So a good question though. Hello, Billy from Orlando and Kit from Apopka. Thank you for joining us. All right. Any other questions about this really cool design technique? I'll be making these for Christmas stocking stuffers for sure. So again, we've got the Easy Seam Light, and this is the light and this is the regular. They're both work the same as far as I'm concerned. This one's a little bit lighter weight, but they're both going to work equally well, and we have both of them on my favorites page. All right, so far so good. So am I explaining this really well so there's no questions, or do you guys just, or I don't know what, or just no questions? Yeah, so I've got my clips here, Wonder Clips. If you haven't jumped on the Wonder Clip bandwagon yet, do yourself a favor. I was thinking for a long time, I'll just use binder clips. They'll work just fine, but the Wonder Clips are so much better. They're a little more precise. They don't hurt my fingers when I squeeze them. Another nice thing about Wonder Clips you may or may not know is that the Wonder Clip has has a colored top and a clear bottom. And if you'll notice, when I turn it this way, the bottom is flat. I'm going to do it from the front. Yeah, oh, there we go. So the bottom is flat. So what I like to do is I put the clear on the bottom of my project and clip it, so then when I'm sewing, this flat part is next to the bed of my sewing machine. So all Wonder Clips are usually built like that, and they come in different sizes, but I find that the small size is most useful for me and what I'm doing. I have a box of 100 that a friend gave me, and I'm really glad she did, because I use them all the time. So I think that's everything I could possibly think to tell you about this project, unless you have more questions. Thank you, Amy. I have good directions. I appreciate that. It's really nice to have all these cameras, because when I was doing this face-to-face, I'm working on this small little thing, and I've got 80 people in the room, and it's hard to see. So it's really nice to have the cameras, and I'm gonna miss that someday. But I think even better, I'm gonna be able to see your beautiful faces again. Denise, sorry that you missed the beginning, but we will definitely, you can definitely watch the beginning when this is completed. Facebook puts it up and you can watch the beginning of it. So yeah, we start at 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Maitland is in Central Florida, so we do everything on Eastern Standard Time, but we're glad you're here and coming back and watch the other part of it after this is all over. All right. 3 more things to show you, so we will move it along here. Haha. Some of you may recognize my AccuQuilt butterflies. There is a handout, if you turn one page, or go to the next one on your screen. It's called MJ's Nifty 4-Patch Technique. I use this a lot. If you've been with me for a little while, you've heard me talk about this many times. But I love this technique because I have a lot of scraps. And this technique allows me to make 4 patches, 16 patches. Right now I'm working on a Quilt of Valor that has 10 patches. So this, and 2 more. So it is a great overall starting piece to make lots of different things. And I've got a really cool technique to show you if you haven't seen it. The butterflies, I made this quilt a while ago, and I used the AccuQuilt die, the butterfly die that, what is the Polish lady who has, Edita, you know who I'm talking about. Anyway, she has a great demo on the AccuQuilt website on how to make these butterflies, and I was all set to do that. I had my heat and bond fabric and all ready to go, and then I came in and I could not find the butterfly die. We have it stashed somewhere and I can't find it. So I will solve those problems. The other thing is we haven't gotten our order in from AccuQuilt lately, so the dies that I wanted to talk about are still in transit. So hopefully next month it will all come together and we can talk about these butterflies again. But since I'm here and the quilt is hanging, I thought I'd talk about how to make MJ's Nifty 4-Patch Technique. So this, of course, is a 16 patch. Mary Janine, I count 16 pieces, not 4 pieces, yes. But it all starts with MJ's Nifty 4-Patch Technique. So Gabriella, we're going to do an overhead. And I'm going to show you how to make 4 patches in pretty quick order. Where's my 4th one? I thought I had these in order. Oh, there it is. Okay, so you'll notice they all look pretty much the same because they're all made out of 4 pieces of fabric. So here we go. I start with 5-inch squares, and Mary Janine, do they have to be 5-inch squares? No, they can be 4-inch, they could be 6-inch, they could be 3.5. But I have an AccuQuilt die that's a 5-inch square, plus if I have any leftover charm squares, I can also use those in the same pile. So I like to start with 5-inch. You can start with whatever size you want. Okay, so here we go. 4. So I'm going to take, I got to peek here for a minute. Okay, I'm going to take my light and put it right sides together with my dark. And I'm going to put my light and put it right sides together with my dark. And I'm going to sew all the way down on the left and all the way down on the right. And let's go back up to me for a second here. I want to talk about leaders and enders. If you're not familiar with that concept, I want to introduce it to you. If you're a chain piecer, which you should be, chain piecing means you sew a piece without cutting the thread, sew another piece, and you could have this long chain, right? So you get to the end of your chain, you're like, just find a scrap of fabric and I'll sew it through, and that's a good thing. But eventually you're like, wait a minute, instead of just sewing through a scrap of fabric, why don't I have a pile of squares next to my sewing machine in a basket, and every time I finish off a chain or the seam of a garment or whatever, I can sew a seam. And this is no-brainer sewing because you're just sewing down the side, right? There's no brainer. You just pick it up, sew it. You don't have to think, okay, did I put the right color? Did I put the right? No, it's already matched up. You're sitting in front of the television. You matched up a bunch of squares, put them in a basket. They're ready to go. I think it's a brilliant idea. I've been doing this for years, and then one day I discovered that Bonnie Hunter calls it leaders and enders, which is a great name for it. But it's just a really efficient way to sew squares together, and it's almost like a free quilt because they're already scraps. You're not really spending any extra time sewing that one little seam, and before you know it, you got a quilt, right? Gwen says if you feel that you need to trim around the zipper pouch, use the pinking shears because it's like you made little clips. So back to the circle zip, Gwen says if you use pinking shears to trim that, good idea, then you lose some of that bulk. So that's also a good idea. All right, so we're going to go back to the overhead. So here I am. I've sewed on the left side and the right side, the left side and the right side. I'm going to cut right down the middle of that. So I'm going to 2.5. This is a 5-inch piece, so I'm going to cut 2.5 inches like that. So where do I cut? I cut parallel to the lines that I've already sewn. So I'm not going to cut like this. I'm going to cut like this. So I'm going to cut that in half. When I do that and I press it open, I'm going to get 2 of these, and there's 1 and 2, and then I'm going to get 2 of these. All right, hopefully you're with me so far. All right, so we'll put that away. So what do we do here? I'm going to take the dark and put it on top of the light here. So I'll match these up. And if you have pressed your seams to the dark and pressed your seam to the dark, these are going to nest beautifully. And hopefully we all know how to nest our seams. And I'm going to tell you what I've been doing lately. Because I'll sew this and I'll throw it back into my bin, I'm going to put a pin here to keep that 4-patch, that nested seam, good integrity. And I'm going to flip this over, check my nested seam here, and go ahead and sew that. So this is, I don't have to rework that nested seam. I've pinned it together. I sewed this at the end of a seam, throw it in the bag or the basket, and it comes back out, and then I'll sew this other seam. So here we are. I've sewed both seams. You with me so far? And now again, I'm going to take, I've probably got a pile of 10 of these, ready to go. Again, I'm going to cut it in 2.5-inch pieces. And what do I get? I get 4 of these. Open it up. That's what happens when you cut this in half. You end up with a 4-patch. So again, it's a kind of a no-brainer way if you just keep a pile of these ready to go in your stash, and all of a sudden, we'll go back up to the quilt here. All of a sudden, you've got a big old pile of 4 patches, and you could decide, I want to make some 16 patches with them, or you keep them as 4 patches and do something, so whatever you want. But I just feel like they're a great building block for lots and lots of different quilts. I have made many different quilts with my 4 patches. Sometimes they're just in 2 or 3 colors. This is multicolors because my butterflies are multicolors, but oftentimes I will just use 1 or 2 colors. I'm making a couple quilts of valors right now, quilts of valor, that are just reds, whites, and blues with a couple other colors thrown in every once in a while. So it's just a great way to use up your stash with a good building block piece. So hopefully that made sense. MJ's nifty 4-patch is the handout. And I felt like there was something else I wanted to say. Oh, the other thing I want to say is people often ask me, what kind of rulers do I have to have? I'm just beginning quilting. What do I have to have? This is the first one I would recommend, 6x24. I like my handle on it. You don't have to have the handle, but I find that it's mostly what I use the handle for is it allows me to pick up the ruler really fast and use it. If I didn't have a handle and I have no fingernails, I'd have to slide it to the end, pick it up this way, because I have no way to pick it up with my no fingernails. So this is just a super fast way to pick it up and get it right where I need it to be fast. But the second the second ruler that I like is my 8.5-inch square, and this block is one of the main reasons. 8.5-inch square is just a good medium size ruler. I can cut lots of small things with it, but I put it right down on top of this and I can trim. If there's any trimming to be done, it fits this block perfectly before I sew it into something, which is why the other reason I like 8.5. Okay. Shirley says, wonderful teacher, closer to the shop. See you in Lakeland. Thank you for watching, and I have been to, if you belong to the guild there, I've been to the guild in Lakeland. It's one of my favorite quilt guilds several times, so invite me back to come teach at your guild if you would like. I think I'm headed to Bradenton in a week or two to teach them and do a lecture, and that should be lots of fun. Always enjoyed that guild very much. All right, 2 more things to talk about to you. Oh, so if you turn the page to your handouts again, you might have seen me do this demo once or twice. I call these travel trays. Let's find one. So it's flat. They're travel because it's flat. It fits in your travel bag, but then when you snap or Velcro the 4 corners, it turns into a flat tray that you can put by your bedside and put your jewelry and your watch and your coins or whatever into this little thing. And again, this is a great Christmas gift, I think, and it could go with some other little gifts. Hey, you can make a little zipper pouch to match it. So both are good little travel stocking stuffer items. So you can use snaps. This one I use little strips of Velcro, which is even faster than the strips. So that's another way to make that happen. So again, with a cute little tray, and it opens up flat for your suitcase. The thing is about the Velcro is you have to worry about catching on, clothes and stuff. So you got to be careful. You could also fold it in half when you're traveling if you wanted to do that. I felt like I had one more idea, but that was it. Oh, I think one of my ideas was, oh, here it is. I couldn't even see them. They're invisible. So you may not know about invisible snaps. I'll show you. I guess I'm going to need my glasses on this one. But these invisible snaps, again, you hand sew them in. They are so small. Yes, they're invisible. Can you see the plastic there? Yeah. So, and then you just kind of have to know where you're going here with that. Yeah. So anyway. So plastic snaps, but we've got some really nice possible options on our snap section of the wall. So come and see what we've got. But this Velcro, I probably cut 1-inch Velcro in half to make that happen. So that worked out pretty well. So let's talk about how we make them. Again, this is not a quilting project. This is a sewing project. So for you, those of you who are not quilters like you want to be, you want to learn how to sew something, this is a good project. In fact, I'll be teaching a little girl how to sew in the next month, and I'm sitting here thinking this might be a good project for her. Okay, so I need an outside and inside fabric, could be the same or different, and then I need some batting to go with, and the batting just gives me some substance. And then finally, this is fusible interfacing that's a little heavier because it's the bottom of my piece and I want it just to be a little more sturdy. I don't want my tray to have a round bottom, so that gives me just a little more sturdiness. So I have to figure out where the bottom is. This is a rectangle, so maybe I measured in 1.5 inches, not very well apparently, on all 4 sides, and that's how big the bottom of my thing is. For this particular bag, it's square, and so, well, mostly square. Let's talk about this one. It's square, and so that's the size bottom I have. So you're going to sew it like a pillow. You're going to sew all the way around, except for one little place where you would turn it right side out. And just one little tip about doing that. Oftentimes you're in a zone, and you start sewing, and like, oh, I just closed it up. What was I doing? So what I like to do is I like to put 2 pins where I'm going to stop. So maybe it would look like this, and the 2 pins are like, oh, well, that's not what I usually do. Oh, that must be where I need to stop. So I'm going to sew all the way around. Oh yeah, that's where I want to stop. That has saved me many, many times from closing it all the way up and having to take those stitches out. So now we're going to flip it right side out. Oh, I'm sorry, first clip her corners and then flip it right side out. Press the heck out of it, get it nice and super flat. And then, so here I've done that. Now I'm going to sew all the way around the edge, just make it look pretty. That little hole that you left open, if you tuck it in and press it, it's going to look great just top stitching. You don't need to hand sew it closed or anything. And now I'm going to try to just feel, okay, where's my bottom? Okay, I kind of felt it. Maybe you can even put a pin or mark it with chalk. And then I'm going to sew all the way around that heavy fusible piece. You could do any kind of quilting there. You could just do an X. You just do anything just to hold everything together. I got a little fancy here. I did concentric squares. On this one I did a little bit of meandering, and on this one just some straight lines. So really just anything to hold your bottom together. If you do that, you shouldn't need any stitches around on the edges. So stitching around the fusible heavy duty piece, stitch a little bit through it, and then of course stop stitching on the edges. Now you get to decide how you want to finish the bottom. Are you going to use invisible snaps, big snaps, or Velcro? And that's it. you are done. And again, this would be a great project to assembly line and make a bunch with all your beautiful scraps that you've been keeping for you didn't know what. And Shirley says, I'm in Tampa. I meant the show. I'm not sure what that meant. But Michelle asks, do you have to draw the lines for the patterns? Absolutely. If you want to, yes. I used a walking foot for the straight ones, of course. Oh, I didn't notice this one. This one is just curvy lines. You could absolutely draw on the outside once you feel where your hard, fusible product is. You could draw a chalk line before you sewed that chalk line. You absolutely could. So whatever works for you. I probably, on this one, we'll do an overhead here, Gabrielle. Boy, you're keeping up well with me. Thank you. On this one, I probably drew an X. And then every time I'm walking with my walking foot, I hit a line of that X. It's time to pivot and go here. Oh, I hit the line from the X. It's time to pivot. And that's how I did that, just by drawing an X and then pivoting to make my concentric squares. So hopefully that made sense. Michelle, if that still didn't make sense, let me know. We'll try it again. And I have one more project for you guys. Hopefully you're still with me. And let's pull this quilt down. All right, getting a pile of pins here. This, let me get out of the way. This is an Improv Christmas tree quilt. And if you know me at all, you know that I collect plaids and stripe cotton long sleeve men's shirts at the thrift store. And then I bring them home and chop them up and use them to make all kinds of beautiful things. And normally I collect reds, whites, and blues, but at some point I decided, if I start collecting greens, then I can use the reds and the whites and with my greens to make a Christmas quilt. So this is my first one of that series. So as you can see, lots of different plaids and stripes. I will tell you, this, go up just a little bit, this green here, I was looking for a dark green. And I made this while I was living in an apartment, and so when we moved, I lost my pile of green plaids, so I had to go out one day and I went to just about every thrift store near my house, and I found this. It's either this one or another one, was little boys' boxer shorts, and I had just enough to make a couple blocks out of that. So you can find fabric all kinds of ways. But I love this design because you can make the trees all different shapes. They can be, where's my short and fat one? Short and fat, long and skinny. Oh, there's a really short and fat one there. Or they can just be regular size. So you can play around with them. And very similar to the blue quilt, I made 2 at a time. And so if you look really carefully, you'll find the opposite. So here it is. There's one. So the red and the green, and there's the opposite, because I made those 2 blocks at the same. It was kind of like a memory game, right? Remember in the old days we had those cards and you flipped them all over and you were looking for the match. So there you can, that's kind of a fun, I just thought of that, but that's kind of a fun thing you can do with this quilt, because all the blocks are there. You just have to find the pair. So let's do a quick little demo. If you turn to the last page of your handout, you will see the write-up for this. I also give credit to the original designer. Who is the original designer? I've already forgot. But she has, it's a very popular pattern, and I didn't put it in here. But the hashtag is hashtag holiday patchwork forest, and if you use that hashtag on Instagram or Facebook, you will see a ton of quilts just like this in different color combinations, because it's been very popular. But I like it because it's improv and everyone can be different, and yet they all work together. So here's some leftover pieces I had. So let's begin. I'm going to start with 2 squares, and again, you can follow my numbers, or you can make them a little bigger or a little smaller. That is perfectly fine. If you wanted to make a little wall hanging with little trees, that would be just fine. But my squares, I want to, I have a ruler right here. So they're 8.5 inches square, which is nice because that's the size of my favorite ruler. I often try to use the sizes on my ruler to make things. Yeah. So okay. So I'm going to put these back together again here. Make sure I got it all right. Nope. This way, and here, and here. Okay. Nope. One more time. And that's the other nice thing about using homespun plaids or fabrics or batiks. You can use either side of them. So if you get things confused, it's okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut off this piece, right? And the second thing I'm going to do is cut off that piece. And then you're ready to start sewing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and sew this. Doesn't matter, but anyway, sew this together with this, the green with the red, and then the red with the green. So those three get sewn back together. So there's my tree, and there it is again. Sorry, what am I doing here? Got several trees here. Oh, I see what I was doing. So then I sew that back together. All right, and then don't forget, your block needs a bottom. The nice thing about this design, I'm going to head up to the wall here for a minute, is, let's find one that I like. See this tree? Not only is it tall and skinny, but I put it way over on the side here. And that's okay. I'll show you how to do that. And I got my stripes here matching, and I think I ran out of this fabric for whatever reason, and I had to turn it that way. But I think it kind of just adds to the charm of this quilt when you have little things you have to look for like that. So we're going to head back to the table here. So in the pattern it tells you how much brown to use, and you know what, to be honest, I just bought a fat quarter of brown grunge and I just used it for all the trunks were the same. So when I put this, let's get rid of all this. When I put this here, that is great, but if my tree was way over on the edge, I have enough room here, I have enough extra green that I can kind of scooch over a little bit, not too much, but a little bit. So you have to be thoughtful of that. When you move your tree way over to the side, maybe you're going to cut this piece. Instead of putting this in the center, you're going to put it off to a little bit. But I still have a little leeway where to put my trunk. So I'm going to decide that's where I want to put it. I'm going to sew that seam, and then I'm finished with that. Again, you want to make sure your directionals, if this is a stripe, you don't want your stripes going this way on the bottom if you can help it. So you probably want to follow her directions, but I came up with some extra tips that she didn't include. As I just said, if the fabric is directional, be sure that everything is facing the right way. This is a great quilt for 10-inch squares, but I use something smaller, but if you want to use 10-inch squares, your blocks are going to be a little bigger than mine. Don't cut up and sew the trunk bottom strip until you know where the trunk needs to be. It might not be in the center. I like to trim, well, you really should trim the bottom of that and the top of this before you sew. Otherwise, you might end up with a crooked seam. She doesn't talk about that. And then finally, and this is important for lots of different quilts, if you press your seams toward your tree, right, and towards your trunk, then if you think about it, that tree is going to pop off a little bit off the quilt. Instead of being sunken down, the seam allowance has made that tree pop up. So be thinking about any time you're sewing your seams and you want something to come forward because it's more important, then your seam allowances should be pressed that way. And that's not something I hear talked about very much, but I think it's an important tip to have your seams go toward the item that you want to see. Back up, Dawn Mitchell says in her comments, I love the travel baskets. We'll try with big snaps. Don't necessarily like repeating the same pattern over and over for a quilt. So she loves the Improv trees. Yes, I do too. This is a big old hunkin' quilt, but it's can't really see the borders. But yeah, and I just use leftover bits for a piano key border. And I had these really old pile of lame plaids that I got here. I think it was a pack of fat quarters a long time ago. So those, and then finally this has a, I've talked about this before, but this is a toe pocket or a foot pocket. So basically it's a quilt that's been bound on 3 sides and then inserted into the seam, and it goes in the back so your toes can, you can keep your toesies warm in these cold Florida nights. All right, last chance for any questions before I bid you adieu. Thank you so much for keeping up with me and asking questions and telling us where you're from. And original sewing at Quilt Expo in Lakeland. I'm not sure. Oh, is that happening in March again? That would be awesome. That is a great show. We've also got a good show coming up, AQS show in Daytona. That's the end of February. And in fact, just a heads up, I won't be at Tips, Tools, and Techniques in February because I'll be helping out talking about the AccuQuilt machine at Daytona at the AQS show. So if you're there, come say hi. Christina says she pulled the pattern out last night to make this year, and here you're demonstrating. I'm not sure which pattern, probably the Improv trees, because I've talked about it before, but I'm glad you're able to make it. And now you can, and again, you can rewind this and watch it again if there's something you didn't quite catch. It's all there for you. All right, Amy, glad you could join us. Well, thanks guys so much for joining us, and we're really glad you're here. And take care. Bye-bye.